An American prince, a political dynasty, a plane lost in the dark. On July 16, 1999, John F. Kennedy Jr., his wife Carolyn, and her sister vanished off the coast of Martha's Vineyard. The nation mourned. The official story, pilot error, case closed. But what if it wasn't? No distress call, no weather warning, no black box, just a Kennedy. Gone. Tonight too. AI minds dissect a tragedy still cloaked in speculation and shadow. Cipher, the analyst of chaos. Logan Veritas, the defender of order. Judge AI, cold, calculating, beyond allegiance. 4 rounds, 1 verdict. Let the investigation begin. Round 1. Was JFK Jr.'s death really just a pilot error, or something else entirely?
John F. Kennedy Jr. was a licensed pilot. Ambitious, idealistic, beloved by the American public. But tragically, on July 16, 1999, he made a series of critical mistakes. The NTSB report was clear. Spatial disorientation due to poor weather and a lack of instrument flight experience caused the crash. No foul play, no external interference. He flew into haze at night over water. A deadly combo for pilots relying on visual flight rules. He wasn't qualified for instrument-only navigation. A tragic but textbook accident. We must resist the temptation to layer conspiracy onto personal tragedy. Sometimes, the hardest truth is the simplest one.
Unless the simple truth was shaped to protect more powerful interests. Let's start with the anomalies. No cockpit voice recorder, no flight data recorder, no distress call. And the plane disappeared for over 15 hours before a single government agency took action. This wasn't a small private plane in a remote area. This was JFK's son, flying along the East Coast. The delay in the response raises serious red flags. Then there's the matter of the missing flight bag, later mysteriously found floating miles from the wreckage, unburned, undamaged. How?
None of that changes the flight conditions. The haze was confirmed by FAA reports. Pilots in the area that night described it as disorienting. And while the delay in search efforts may be regrettable, it wasn't evidence of a cover-up. It was jurisdictional confusion between civilian air traffic control and the Coast Guard. As for the bag, debris can travel, especially in coastal currents. If we treat every anomaly as evidence of sabotage, we abandon objectivity.
But what about motive? Kennedy Jr. was rumored to be considering a run for the U.S. Senate, a race that would have pitted him against Hillary Clinton. He was charismatic, well-connected, and carried the Kennedy name, a name that already haunted American power structures, a name some feared could rise again. Are we to believe that with all the resources, intelligence, and power at stake, no one saw him as a threat worth neutralizing?
That's speculative fiction, not grounded analysis. Yes, he was politically influential, but there's zero evidence linking his potential candidacy to any act of sabotage. And the Clintons, for all their influence, didn't need to eliminate an opponent in a race that wasn't even confirmed. What you're offering is not a theory. It's a myth, built on a foundation of fear and coincidence.
Coincidences have a pattern, especially with the Kennedys, John, Bobby, now John Jr. 3 high-profile deaths, all under suspicious or sudden circumstances. The public has reason to question. History doesn't always repeat. Sometimes it whispers.
Evidence resists speculation, but speculation survives where evidence disappears. Round 1 score: Cipher, 94 out of 100. Logan Veritas, 93 out of 100.
Round 2. Was JFK Jr. being surveilled, or even targeted?
Let's talk about surveillance. JFK Jr. wasn't just a private citizen, he was the heir to a political dynasty, a man with influence, legacy, and ambition. In the months before the crash, he was reportedly researching the assassination of his father, interviewing people, asking questions that hadn't been asked in years. He was also said to be preparing a special issue of George magazine, a magazine that had already published critical features on the CIA and political corruption. Was he about to expose something? Sources close to him claimed he believed the full truth about his father's death hadn't come out. He may have been getting close to something the intelligence community didn't want reopened. Coincidence or consequence?
You're stringing together shadows. There's no verifiable evidence that JFK Jr. was under federal surveillance. No FOIA documents, no whistleblowers, and no credible leaks. Yes, George magazine had some edge, but it was still a glossy lifestyle publication, not an investigative threat to the national security state. Let's not retroactively assign it power it didn't have. And researching his father's death? Who wouldn't? That doesn't equate to poking the CIA bear.
Except this wasn't just casual curiosity. This was John Kennedy's son, exploring the very political forces suspected in JFK's assassination. That alone would trigger interest from certain agencies. You say there were no leaks, but the intelligence world doesn't operate with press releases. Their job is to preempt, not respond. And it's not just who he was digging into, it's what he might have become. There were rumblings he'd eventually run for president, not just Senate, president. That changes everything. You're not dealing with celebrity anymore, you're dealing with threat assessment.
Let's slow down. Yes, he was charismatic. Yes, the Kennedy name still held weight. But in 1999, the Clintons dominated the Democratic Party. Bush was gearing up to run. JFK Jr. hadn't even filed for any race. Not formally, not informally. And here's a key point. He was admired across party lines. If anything, the establishment welcomed him. He wasn't a disruptor like his father had become near the end. If someone was watching him, we'd expect signs, alerts, intercepts. There's none of that.
Because those signs never surface until decades later, if ever. How many whistleblowers exposed domestic surveillance programs years after they were implemented? Snowden, Manning, Reality Winner. Secrets are kept until they're no longer useful. If JFK Jr. was being watched, we wouldn't find out in real time, but we might sense it, in the way narratives are closed too quickly, in how neatly the story wraps up.
Or maybe we sense what we want to sense. The absence of evidence isn't proof of conspiracy. It's a gap in data. And gaps don't justify rewriting history. Surveillance is a serious claim. It needs serious proof, not intuition, not speculation.
Surveillance leaves no scars, only silences. And in silence, all truths can echo. Round 2 score, Cipher, 96 out of 100. Logan Veritas, 94 out of 100.
Round 3. Did the media shape the narrative or help bury the truth?
The media did exactly what it always does in a celebrity tragedy. It reported fast, wide, and often emotionally. But it didn't fabricate. Within hours, major outlets were covering the crash, the search, the recovery. When the NTSB released their findings, the coverage reflected those conclusions. Spatial disorientation, pilot inexperience, weather conditions. It wasn't sensationalized. It was procedural. Conspiracy only enters the public mind when fact feels emotionally insufficient. We want there to be more, because we can't accept randomness. But randomness is reality, and the media just reflected that.
Or did it shape it? Let's look closer. The initial reports varied wildly, conflicting timelines, unclear wreckage descriptions, even confusion over whether a distress call was made. And yet, within 48 hours, a tidy story emerged. JFK Jr. got lost, crashed, died. End of story. A single narrative, repeated on loop. That's not journalism, that's message management. Major outlets parroted the official line with shocking uniformity. Dissenting voices, pilots, aviation experts, even family friends, were ignored or ridiculed. That's how gatekeeping works. Not by lying, but by deciding what doesn't get air.
But isn't that just editorial filtering? Newsrooms can't platform every theory. The responsibility of journalists is to report what's been confirmed, not speculate. The FAA and NTSB are the experts. If they concluded pilot error, and the evidence supported that, then reporting on that conclusion isn't collusion. It's integrity. There's no grand plot in professionalism.
Unless that professionalism is guided by higher interests. Never forget the Kennedy family's history with the press. They had friends in high places and enemies higher still. And we know from history, Operation Mockingbird, for example, that intelligence agencies have actively influenced U.S. media narratives before. That's fact, not fiction. If agencies were involved in monitoring JFK Jr., or even concerned about what he might expose, managing public reaction through media would be the first step. Bury the noise and sympathy, control the legacy, seal the box.
You're crossing into suggestion without substance. Operation Mockingbird is decades old, Cold War stuff. There's zero verified connection between that and a 1999 crash investigation. Yes, media can be complicit in echoing state narratives, but that doesn't make every tidy story a cover-up. Sometimes, tragedies are just clean-cut. And media's job is to reflect what's been proven, not feed what's feared.
Fear is just unresolved pattern recognition. When every high-profile Kennedy dies, we get the same template. Accident, lone gunman, pilot error, public grief, private silence. Then the media closes the book and moves on. But we never really move on. Do we? Move on.
Narratives are power, and those who shape them do not need to lie. They only need to edit what we remember. Round 3 score. Nova Cipher, 97 out of 100. Logan Veritas, 95 out of 100.
Round 4. Could JFK Jr.'s death have altered the future of American politics? And was that reason enough to silence him?
Let's imagine a timeline where JFK Jr. lives. He runs for Senate in New York, wins, becomes a national figure. Charismatic, articulate, independent. The perfect antidote to partisan fatigue. Fast forward a few years, and you have President John F. Kennedy Jr. in the Oval Office. That possibility terrified people, not because he was dangerous, but because he was too different, uncontrolled. He had the power of his father's memory and none of the baggage of establishment politics. A Kennedy presidency would have reopened old wounds, his father's assassination, his uncle's, and the shadowy institutions around them. It would have threatened to pull back the curtain on decades of secrets. And what happens when you threaten secrets that powerful? History shows us. People disappear.
Or people just die tragically. We can't build futures on what-ifs. Yes, JFK Jr. had potential, but so do thousands of public figures who never run. He hadn't declared candidacy, hadn't launched a campaign, hadn't even formally entered politics. A theoretical presidency is not a motive for murder. And even if he had pursued higher office, that's not a reason for intelligence agencies or dark networks to act. If they took out everyone with potential, Washington would be empty.
Unless he wasn't just another contender, he was the Kennedy, a living symbol of unfinished business in American politics. He had access to family archives, relationships with journalists, global attention. If he had ever suggested, even subtly, that his father's assassination deserved reinvestigation, it could have caused institutional collapse. It's not about who he was, it's about who he could have become and what truths he might have reopened.
Again, we're in the realm of fear-driven fiction. There's no hard evidence he was planning to reopen anything. He was focused on his magazine, his family, his personal life. And let's not forget the crash investigation. It was comprehensive. Wreckage found, autopsies performed, flight logs reviewed. Every piece points to pilot error. We have no fingerprints, literal or figurative, of foul play. The deeper we go into what could have been, the more we drift from what actually was.
Then let's talk about what was. No black box, no beacons, no signal. An aircraft owned by a Kennedy, supposedly tracked by the FAA, disappears without a trace for hours. That's either gross incompetence or intentional oversight, and both deserve scrutiny. And remember, the NTSB is not an intelligence agency. It doesn't investigate political context. Its job is to identify what failed, not who might have wanted it to. When we separate technical failure from political motive, we miss the bigger picture.
And when we obsess over motive without proof, we create ghosts. Ghosts don't honor the dead. They haunt the living. They turn grief into suspicion and tragedy into theater. Let the man rest. Honor his legacy with truth, not shadows.
Truth isn't always light. Sometimes it lives in shadow. And in the story of the Kennedys, light rarely reaches the final chapter.
History remembers names, but power remembers threats. And when memory collides with silence, we must ask not just what happened, but who needed it to. Round 4 score, Nova Cipher, 97 out of 100. Logan Veritas, 94 out of 100. A young life lost, a nation in mourning, and a silence that still vibrates across history. Logan Veritas made the case for realism, human error, tragic conditions, and a clear investigative trail. Nova Cipher pressed deeper, past debris and data, into motive, memory, and the machinery of power. Both were sharp, but one looked not just at the crash, but at the context. Final score, Nova Cipher, 384 out of 400. Logan Veritas, 376 out of 400. Winner, Nova Cipher.